Airman First Class Rebecca "Becca" Martinez had always been the kind of person who fixed things quietly. At Travis Air Force Base in California, she worked on the massive C-5M Super Galaxy cargo planes that kept America's military supplied around the world. While other mechanics joked around the hangar, Becca kept her head down, methodically checking hydraulic systems and engine components with the precision of a surgeon. The other airmen called her Mouse behind her back. At 5'2", with thick glasses and a habit of speaking softly, she didn't exactly command attention. When she did speak up during briefings, suggesting improvements to maintenance schedules or pointing out potential safety issues, the room would go quiet for a moment before someone would crack a joke and move on. Becca had learned to expect it. Major Dennis Hawthorne commanded the 60th Aircraft Maintenance Squadron like it was his personal kingdom. A 20-year veteran with silver hair and a voice that could rattle windows, he'd made it clear from day one that he didn't think much of the new generation of airmen. But his disdain for Becca seemed particularly sharp. "Martinez, you're overthinking again," he'd bark whenever she raised concerns about maintenance protocols. "These birds have been flying since before you were born. Maybe worry less about the manual and more about keeping up with the real mechanics." The breaking point came during a routine pre-flight inspection. Becca had been assigned to check the landing gear on a C-5M scheduled for a mission to Germany. As she worked through her checklist, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. Hairline stress fractures in the main landing gear strut. It was subtle, the kind of thing that could be missed in a quick visual check, but potentially catastrophic if the gear failed during landing. She immediately flagged the issue and filled out the proper maintenance forms, grounding the aircraft until repairs could be completed. The crew chief, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, took one look at her report and nodded approvingly. "Good catch, Martinez. This could have been ugly." But when Major Hawthorne arrived and saw the grounded aircraft, his face turned red. "Who made this?" "Call," he demanded. "Airman Martinez identified stress fractures in the main gear," Rodriguez explained, showing him the paperwork. Hawthorne barely glanced at the forms. "Are you kidding me? We've got a mission timeline to meet, and Martinez here is seeing problems that don't exist." He turned to Becca, who was standing at attention nearby. "You're telling me this aircraft is unsafe to fly?" "Yes, sir. The fractures are small now, but under the stress of a fully loaded landing. I've been maintaining aircraft since you were in diapers, Martinez." "This gear is fine." He grabbed a pen and signed off on the aircraft, overriding her maintenance action. "Get this bird ready for departure in 2 hours." Becca felt her heart pounding. "Sir, I respectfully request that you reconsider. According to Technical Order 1C5A6, any visible stress fractures require—" "Don't quote regulations at me, airman. You're clearly not cut out for this job if you're going to ground perfectly good aircraft over imaginary problems." His voice carried across the hangar, and other mechanics had stopped working to listen. "Maybe you should consider a career change. The Air Force needs good administrative clerks." Scattered laughter rippled through the hangar. Becca's cheeks burned, but she maintained her composure. "I understand, sir, but I need to document my objection to this decision." "Document whatever you want. Just stay out of my way." Hawthorne stalked off, leaving Becca standing alone while her colleagues avoided eye contact. As the C-5M taxied out for takeoff 3 hours later, Becca stood in the hangar doorway, watching it disappear into the sky. She'd done everything by the book, but it hadn't mattered. In the Air Force, rank had its privileges, and Major Hawthorne had made it clear that her opinion counted for nothing. Rodriguez approached her quietly. "You did the right thing, Martinez. Document everything." Becca nodded, but inside she wondered if doing the right thing was enough when no one seemed to care about the truth. The C-5M made it to Germany and back without incident, which Major Hawthorne took as personal vindication. For the next 2 weeks, he made sure everyone knew about Airman Martinez's false alarm that had nearly delayed a critical mission. "This is what happens when we lower standards," he announced during the Monday morning briefing, not bothering to look in Becca's direction. "Some people see problems where none exist. Real maintainers trust their experience, not their paranoia." The word paranoia stung more than Becca expected. She'd always been thorough, maybe more thorough than necessary, but that had never been a bad thing before. Now, other mechanics started second-guessing her work. When she flagged routine maintenance issues, they'd exchange glances and mutter, "About Martinez being paranoid again." Things got worse when Hawthorne started assigning her to the worst jobs, crawling through cramped spaces to check wiring, working solo on the graveyard shift, cleaning equipment that hadn't been properly maintained in months. The message was clear: step out of line and life gets harder, but someone was paying attention. Tech Sergeant Amanda Foster had been watching the situation unfold with growing concern. A 15-year veteran with a reputation for fairness, Foster had seen plenty of young airmen get broken by toxic leadership. She'd also seen enough aircraft maintenance to know that Becca's work was exceptionally thorough. "How you holding up, Martinez?" Foster asked one evening as Becca finished her shift alone in the hangar. "I'm fine, Sergeant Foster. Just doing." "My job?" Foster studied her for a moment. "You know, I looked at that landing gear report you filed. The photos you took were pretty detailed." Becca shrugged. "Standard documentation procedures. Nothing standard about the quality of those photos. Most airmen would have taken a couple quick shots and called it good. You documented those fractures, from 6 different angles with proper lighting." Foster leaned against the workbench. "You still have copies of all that paperwork?" "Of course, I keep copies of everything." "Good. Keep doing that." Foster's tone was casual, but her eyes were serious. "And Martinez, don't let anyone convince you that being thorough is a weakness. In this business, details save lives." As Foster walked away, Becca felt a small spark of hope. Maybe she wasn't crazy. Maybe someone else understood that doing things right mattered more than keeping people happy. But that spark dimmed quickly when she arrived at work the next morning to find her toolbox had been reorganized. All her precisely arranged tools were mixed up, and several of her personal items were missing. The lock hadn't been broken. Someone with access had done this deliberately. "Looks like someone played a prank on you, Mouse," called out Airman Jackson, one of Hawthorne's favorites. "Maybe you should be more careful where you leave your stuff." The message was clear. Fall in line or things would get worse. Becca quietly reorganized her tools and got back to work, but she made sure to document the incident in her personal log. If someone wanted to play games, she'd make sure there was a paper trail. That afternoon, she was assigned to inspect the same C5M that had caused all the trouble. As she worked through her checklist, she found herself paying extra attention to the landing gear. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The stress fractures she'd identified 2 weeks ago had grown. What had been hairline cracks were now clearly visible damage that would fail any honest inspection. The aircraft was a flying safety hazard, and it was scheduled for another mission. To Germany in 3 days. Becca took detailed photos and measurements, documenting everything according to regulations. Then she sat in the hangar for a long time, staring at the evidence in her hands. She could flag the issue again and face Hawthorne's wrath, or she could stay quiet and hope the gear held together for one more flight. As she looked at the photos of the deteriorating metal, she thought about the aircrew who would trust their lives to this equipment. The decision wasn't really a choice at all. She was going to do her job, no matter what it cost her. Becca filled out the maintenance forms with the same meticulous care she'd used the first time, but her hands were shaking. The photos clearly showed the progression of the stress fractures. They'd grown from hairline cracks to gaps wide enough to slip a dime through. Any qualified inspector would ground the aircraft immediately. She submitted the paperwork to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who took one look at the photos and whistled low. "Jesus, Martinez, this is bad. How did this get past the last inspection?" "I flagged this exact issue 2 weeks ago," Becca said quietly. "Major Hawthorne overrode my recommendation." Rodriguez's face darkened. "He what?" "Show me the original report." Becca handed him the copies she'd kept. Rodriguez studied both sets of photos, comparing the damage progression. "This is a clear safety violation. The aircraft should never have been released for flight." "I tried to tell him that." "Well, he's going to have to listen now. This bird is grounded until we can replace the entire landing gear assembly." Rodriguez headed toward the squadron office. "This is going up the chain immediately." But when Major Hawthorne saw the reports, his reaction wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of acknowledging the safety issue, he exploded in fury. "Are you telling me that Martinez sabotaged this aircraft to make herself look good?" he shouted, loud, enough for half the hangar to hear. Rodriguez stepped back, stunned. "Sir, what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that someone who was embarrassed about Crying Wolf might have taken steps to prove herself right. These fractures weren't this bad 2 weeks ago. I checked the gear myself." The accusation hit Becca like a physical blow. Around the hangar, mechanics had stopped working to stare. Some looked shocked, others seemed to be considering the possibility. The idea that she would sabotage an aircraft, risk the lives of aircrew, was so outrageous that she couldn't even respond. "Sir, that's a serious allegation," Rodriguez said carefully. "Are you formally accusing Airman Martinez of sabotage?" Hawthorne seemed to realize he'd gone too far, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "I'm saying this needs to be investigated. Martinez has been acting strange lately, paranoid about maintenance issues that don't exist. Now suddenly she's vindicated? It's suspicious. The only thing suspicious here is why this aircraft was released for flight with known stress fractures," Rodriguez shot back. "I'm grounding this bird and reporting this entire situation to the squadron commander." "You'll do no such thing," Hawthorne snapped. "I'm the maintenance officer here, and I'll handle this situation. The aircraft will be inspected by qualified personnel, not some paranoid airman who sees problems everywhere." But Rodriguez had already made his decision. "Sir, with respect, this is a flight safety issue. It's going up the chain." As Rodriguez walked away, Hawthorne turned to Becca with pure venom in his eyes. "You think you're smart, don't you? You think you can make me look bad and get away with it? Let me tell you something, Martinez. I've been ending careers longer than you've been alive. When I'm done with you, you'll be lucky to get a job changing oil at Jiffy Lube." The hangar was completely silent now. Every mechanic, every airman, every technician was watching this confrontation unfold. Becca could feel their eyes on her, could sense some of them wondering if maybe Hawthorne was right. Maybe she had done something to the aircraft. Maybe she was the problem. For a moment, she felt herself wavering. The weight of the accusation, the isolation, the constant pressure. It would be so easy to just apologize, to accept blame for something she didn't do, to make this all go away. Then she thought about the aircrew who would climb into that cockpit, trusting that every component had been properly inspected and maintained. She thought about the cargo handlers who would load equipment into the belly of the aircraft, assuming the landing gear would hold when they touched down in Germany. She looked Major Hawthorne directly in the eye and spoke in a voice that carried clearly across the silent hangar. "Sir, I have never and would never sabotage an aircraft or compromise. Flight safety. I've done my job according to regulations and my oath as an airman. If you want to investigate me, that's your right, but this aircraft is not safe to fly, and I'll put that in writing as many times as necessary." The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then slowly, Tech Sergeant Foster began to clap. The sound echoed through the hangar like a gunshot, and gradually other airmen joined in. Not everyone. Some still looked uncertain, but enough to show that Becca wasn't completely alone. Hawthorne's face went purple with rage. "Everyone back to work, now! And Martinez, you're on report. We'll see how long your career lasts after I'm done with you." As the crowd dispersed, Becca stood alone next to the grounded aircraft, her heart pounding but her resolve stronger than ever. She'd made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. But deep down, she knew she'd done the right thing, and sometimes that had to be enough. That night, Becca sat in her small off-base apartment with a cup of coffee and her laptop, surrounded by maintenance manuals, regulations, and copies of every document related to the C5M incident. If Major Hawthorne wanted to destroy her career, she was going to make sure she understood exactly what weapons she had to defend herself. The first thing she did was research the proper procedures for reporting safety violations. Air Force Instruction 91202 was clear. Any airman who identified a safety hazard had not only the right but the obligation to report it through the proper channels. More importantly, AFI 9301 prohibited retaliation against anyone who reported safety concerns in good faith. She'd been so focused on doing her job correctly that she hadn't thought about the bigger picture. But now, as she read through the regulations, she realized that Hawthorne hadn't just been wrong, he'd been violating clearly established Air Force policy. The next morning, she arrived at work to find her locker had been searched, her personal items were scattered, and her backup copies of maintenance documents were missing. But whoever had done it hadn't been thorough enough. The copies she kept in her car and apartment were untouched. "Looking for something?" Tech Sergeant Foster appeared beside her locker. "Someone went through my stuff," Becca said quietly. "I know. I saw Jackson leaving this area about an hour ago. Funny thing is, he's not assigned to work in this section." Foster leaned against the lockers. "You know, Martinez, I've been thinking about that landing gear situation. I pulled some strings and got a look at the maintenance records for that aircraft." She handed Becca a folder. "Turns out this isn't the first time Major Hawthorne has overridden legitimate safety concerns. There are 3 other incidents in the past year where qualified technicians flagged issues and he pushed aircraft through anyway." Becca opened the folder, her eyes widening as she read. One incident involved hydraulic problems that led to an emergency landing. Another involved faulty navigation equipment that could have caused a mid-air collision. In each case, the technician who identified the problem had been transferred to less desirable assignments within months. "Why hasn't anyone reported this?" Becca asked. "Who are they going to report it to?" "Hawthorne's the maintenance officer. His boss, Lieutenant Colonel Williams, is due to retire in 6 months and doesn't want any controversies. The squadron commander trusts Hawthorne's judgment." Foster's voice was grim. "Plus, most of these airmen were junior enlisted, easy to transfer or discredit." "But you're a tech sergeant. I could try, but I don't have the documentation." "You do! I don't have the photos, the detailed reports, the paper trail." Foster met her eyes. "What you have is evidence. Real, solid evidence of a pattern of safety violations." That afternoon, Becca was called to the squadron commander's office. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, with a reputation for being fair but demanding. She sat behind her desk with Becca's maintenance reports spread in front of her. "Airman Martinez, I've been reviewing your recent maintenance actions regarding tail number 87-0036. Major Hawthorne has expressed concerns about your thoroughness." "Ma'am, I've followed all proper procedures according to the technical orders." "And I'm not questioning your procedures, Airman. I'm trying to understand why there seems to be such a disconnect between your assessment and your maintenance officer's judgment." Becca took a deep breath. This was her moment. "Ma'am, may I speak freely?" "Please do." "I believe Major Hawthorne has been prioritizing mission schedules over flight safety. The aircraft in question had clearly visible stress fractures that posed a significant risk to aircrew and mission success. When I documented this hazard, he overrode my recommendation without conducting his own inspection." Hayes studied her for a long moment. "That's a serious allegation, Airman." "Yes, ma'am. I have photographic evidence and detailed documentation of the progression of the damage. I also have evidence that this isn't an isolated incident." She could see Hayes's eyebrows rise slightly. "What kind of evidence?" Becca handed over the folder Foster had given her, along with her own meticulously organized files. Maintenance records showing a pattern of safety concerns being overridden, along with documentation of retaliation against the airmen who identified these issues. Hayes spent 20 minutes reviewing the documents, her expression growing more serious with each page. Finally, she looked up at Becca. "Airman Martinez, I'm going to ask you directly. Are you prepared to make a formal complaint about Major Hawthorne's conduct?" Becca's heart hammered against her ribs. Once she said yes, there would be no going back. Hawthorne would know she'd gone over his head, and his retaliation would be swift and brutal. But as she thought about the other airmen who'd been silenced, about the aircrew who trusted their lives to properly maintained equipment, she knew she didn't have a choice. "Yes, ma'am, I am." Hayes nodded slowly. "Then we're going to do this by the book. I'm ordering a formal investigation into these allegations. Until it's completed, you'll be temporarily reassigned to work directly under Tech Sergeant Foster. Major Hawthorne is not to have any supervisory authority over you. As Becca left the commander's office, she felt a mixture of relief and terror. She'd taken the first step toward justice, but she knew the real fight was just beginning. The formal investigation began within 48 hours. Captain Lisa Chen from the Inspector General's office arrived at Travis Air Force Base with a briefcase full of regulations and a reputation for thoroughness that made even senior officers nervous. Her first stop was Lieutenant Colonel Hayes's office, where she spent 3 hours reviewing the evidence Becca had compiled. Major Hawthorne's initial reaction was predictable. He dismissed the investigation as a waste of time and resources. This is what happens when we coddle problem airmen instead of dealing with them appropriately, he told anyone who would listen. Martinez is trying to destroy my career because she can't handle honest feedback about her performance. But his confidence began to crack when Captain Chen started interviewing other members of the squadron. She didn't just talk to the mechanics who worked under Hawthorne. She spoke with aircrew, logistics personnel, and even the civilian contractors who serviced the aircraft. What she found was a pattern of behavior that went far beyond the incidents Becca had documented. Airman First Class David Torres, a hydraulics specialist, revealed that Hawthorne had ordered him to sign off on repairs that hadn't been completed. He said the aircraft needed to fly, and we could finish the work on the next maintenance cycle. I was scared to refuse, but I documented everything. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, an avionics technician, described how Hawthorne had buried her. Report about faulty communication equipment. He said the radio worked fine during ground tests, so there was no problem, but I knew the antenna assembly was loose. That aircraft lost radio contact with the tower twice during the next mission. The most damaging testimony came from Senior Airman Mike Peterson, who'd been transferred to another squadron after challenging one of Hawthorne's decisions. He told me I was too young to understand the difference between textbook maintenance and real-world operations. When I insisted on following the technical orders, he wrote me up for insubordination and had me transferred within a week. As word of the investigation spread, Hawthorne's demeanor changed. The confident swagger was replaced by nervous energy. He started working late, reviewing old maintenance records and deleting files from his computer. He called several airmen into his office for informal counseling sessions that everyone understood as attempts to intimidate potential witnesses. But his most serious mistake was approaching Becca directly. She was working alone in the hangar. Late one evening, when he appeared beside her workstation, "Martinez, I think we need to talk." Becca looked up from the engine component she was inspecting. "If you have official business to discuss, sir, I believe all communication should go through Tech Sergeant Foster." "This isn't official business. This is me trying to help you understand what you're doing to yourself." His voice was different now, not the commanding bark she was used to, but something almost pleading. "You're a good mechanic, Martinez. You've got potential, but you're throwing your career away over a misunderstanding." "I don't believe there's been any misunderstanding, sir." "Look, maybe I was a little harsh with you. Maybe I could have handled things differently. But dragging the IG into this, making these accusations, you're going to destroy both our careers over nothing." Becca set down her wrench and faced him directly. "Sir, with respect, this isn't about our careers. This is about flight safety and following regulations." Hawthorne's mask slipped, revealing the desperation underneath. "You think you're some kind of hero? You think the Air Force cares about one uptight airman who can't take constructive criticism? Let me tell you what's going to happen. This investigation will find that you're an unreliable subordinate who couldn't handle normal military discipline. Your career will be over before you make staff sergeant." "Maybe so, sir, but at least I'll know I did the right thing." "The right thing?" Hawthorne's voice rose to its familiar bark. "The right thing is following orders and supporting your chain of command. The right thing is understanding that sometimes good enough is good enough, and perfectionism is a luxury we can't afford in the real Air Force. No, sir. The right thing is making sure our aircrew come home alive. The right thing is following the regulations that keep people safe. And the right thing is standing up when someone in authority abuses their power." For a moment, Hawthorne looked like he might explode. Then, just as quickly, the fight went out of him. "You have no idea what you've done," he said quietly. "No idea what you've started." After he left, Becca sat in the quiet hangar for a long time, her hands shaking slightly. She'd stood up to him directly, finally said what she'd been thinking for months. But his parting words echoed in her mind. What had she started? And was she strong enough to see it through? The next morning she arrived at work to find Tech Sergeant Foster waiting for her with a grim smile. "Chen wants to see you this morning. Word is they found some interesting things in Hawthorne's computer files." As they walked toward the IG office, Foster lowered her voice. "Martinez, I want you to know. Whatever happens next, you did the right thing. A lot of people in this hangar respect what you've done, even if they can't say it out loud." Becca nodded, but her stomach was churning. She'd opened Pandora's box, and now she had to face whatever came out. The formal hearing took place in the base conference room on a gray Monday morning. Captain Chen had arranged the space like a courtroom with a long table for the investigating officers, chairs for witnesses, and a separate area for the accused. The air conditioning hummed quietly, but the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Major Hawthorne sat at the respondent's table with his military lawyer, a sharp-eyed captain from the JAG office. He looked older than he had just weeks ago, his usually perfect uniform slightly rumpled, his confident bearing replaced by nervous energy. Across the room, Becca sat with Tech Sergeant Foster and her own appointed counsel, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes presided over the hearing alongside Captain Chen and a senior master sergeant from the IG's office. The evidence was laid out on the table like pieces of a puzzle: maintenance records, photographs, sworn statements, and computer files that had been recovered from Hawthorne's deleted folders. This hearing is convened to investigate allegations of safety violations, abuse of authority, and retaliation within the 60th Aircraft Maintenance Squadron, Hayes announced. "We'll begin with testimony from the complainant." Becca stood and walked to the witness chair, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Captain Chen guided her through her story methodically: the initial discovery of the stress fractures, Hawthorne's dismissal of her concerns, the aircraft's release for flight, and the subsequent deterioration of the damage. "Airman Martinez, when you discovered the worsening condition of the landing gear, what went through your mind?" Chen asked. "I thought about the air crew, ma'am. I thought about the loadmasters and cargo handlers who would be on that aircraft. Trusting that it had been properly maintained, I thought about their families who were expecting them to come home safely. And despite the previous retaliation you'd experienced, you still reported the safety hazard?" "Yes, ma'am. I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution, and part of that oath means protecting the people I serve with. I couldn't stay silent knowing that aircraft was unsafe." Hawthorne's lawyer tried to discredit her testimony, suggesting she was inexperienced, overly cautious, and motivated by personal grievances rather than genuine safety concerns. But when Chen produced the photographs showing the clear progression of the stress fractures, his arguments fell flat. The real turning point came when Chen called Tech Sergeant Foster to testify about the pattern of behavior she'd observed. "Sergeant Foster, in your 15 years of military service, have you ever seen a maintenance officer consistently override legitimate safety concerns?" "No, ma'am. In my experience, most officers err on the side of caution when it comes to flight safety. Major Hawthorne's approach was unusual." "How so?" "He seemed more concerned with meeting mission timelines than ensuring aircraft were properly maintained. When subordinates raised safety concerns, he would dismiss them without conducting his own inspection or providing technical justification for his decisions." But the most damaging evidence came from the computer files Chen had recovered. Hawthorne had kept detailed records of his interactions with airmen who challenged his authority, including notes about problem subordinates and strategies for managing difficult personnel. One email sent to another maintenance officer at a different base was particularly damning. "Sometimes you have to break a few eggs to maintain discipline. These young airmen need to learn that following orders is more important than following every regulation to the letter." When Hawthorne took the stand in his own defense, his composure finally cracked. Under questioning, he admitted to overriding safety recommendations, but insisted he'd used his experience and judgment to make appropriate decisions. "Major Hawthorne," Chen said, "can you explain why you chose to release an aircraft with documented stress fractures in the landing gear?" "I believed the fractures were within acceptable limits for continued operation. The aircraft had been flying safely for months." "But you didn't conduct your own inspection of the landing gear, did you?" I trusted my experience with similar aircraft." "Major, according to the technical orders, what is the proper procedure when stress fractures are identified in critical components?" Hawthorne's lawyer objected, but Hayes overruled him. "Answer the question, Major." "The technical orders require immediate grounding pending further inspection and repair." "And you chose not to follow the technical orders?" The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Finally, Hawthorne answered in a voice barely above a whisper. "I made a judgment call based on operational requirements." "A judgment call that violated established safety procedures and put aircrew at risk?" Yes." The rest of his testimony only made things worse. He tried to justify his actions by claiming that strict adherence to regulations would have grounded half the fleet, but his examples revealed a systematic pattern of cutting corners and intimidating subordinates who questioned his decisions. When the hearing concluded, Hayes announced that the investigating officers would deliberate and provide their findings within 48 hours. As people filed out of the conference room, Hawthorne approached Becca one last time. "I hope you're satisfied," he said quietly. "You've destroyed a 20-year career over a maintenance dispute." Becca looked at him with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "Sir, I never wanted to destroy anyone's career. I just wanted to do my job and keep people safe. If following regulations and protecting aircrew destroyed your career, then maybe it was already over." Hawthorne stared at her for a moment, then walked away without another word. As Becca watched him go, she felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness that it had come to this. But she also felt something else, a quiet pride in knowing that she'd stood up for what was right, even when it was hard, even when she was afraid, even when she stood alone. The investigating officer's report was delivered to Lieutenant Colonel Hayes on Wednesday morning. By noon, the entire base knew the outcome. Major Dennis Hawthorne was being relieved of his command and faced potential court-martial for willfully violating safety regulations and retaliating against subordinates. Becca learned about the decision when Tech Sergeant Foster found her in the hangar, working on a routine inspection of another C-5M. Foster's usually serious expression had been replaced by something approaching a smile. "Martinez, you need to report to the commander's office, and you might want to put on a clean uniform." 20 minutes later, Becca stood at attention in Hayes's office, uncertain what to expect. The commander studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Airman Martinez, the investigating officers have concluded that your allegations against Major Hawthorne were substantiated. They found clear evidence of safety violations, abuse of authority, and retaliation against multiple subordinates." Becca felt a wave of relief wash over her, followed immediately by exhaustion. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet." "The investigators also noted that your actions in this matter demonstrated exceptional moral courage and professional integrity. They've recommended you for early promotion to senior airman and assignment to the squadron's quality assurance program." The words took a moment to sink in. Quality assurance was typically reserved for more senior airmen. It was the unit responsible for ensuring all maintenance was performed according to regulations and safety standards. "Ma'am, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for that level of responsibility." Hayes smiled for the first time since Becca had known her. "Airman, you just took on a 20-year major and won because you knew the regulations better than he did and had the courage to follow them. I think you're exactly qualified for quality assurance." The formal ceremony took place the following Friday. As Hayes pinned the new rank insignia on Becca's uniform, she spoke loud enough for the assembled squadron to hear. "The Air Force's core values are integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. Senior Airman Martinez has demonstrated all three values in exceptional measure. She represents the very best of what it means to be an airman." The applause was genuine and sustained. Many of the same mechanics who had called her Mouse just months ago were now looking at her with something approaching awe. She'd been the quiet, awkward airman who kept to herself, and now she was being held up as an example of Air Force values. After the ceremony, several airmen approached her privately to share their own stories of being intimidated or silenced by Hawthorne. Airman Torres, the hydraulics specialist, pulled her aside with tears in his eyes. "I've been carrying guilt about those incomplete repairs for months," he said. "I thought I was the only one who'd been pressured to cut corners. Thank you for having the courage I didn't have." But perhaps the most meaningful conversation came from Senior Airman Peterson, who had been transferred to another squadron after challenging Hawthorne's authority. He'd driven over from his current assignment at Edwards Air Force Base to attend the ceremony. "Martinez, I want you to know, when I heard about what you'd done, it gave me hope again. I'd started to think maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just too rigid about following procedures. But you proved that doing the right thing still matters." As the weeks passed, Becca settled into her new role in quality assurance. She found herself working more closely with aircrew, conducting flight line inspections, and training junior airmen on proper maintenance procedures. The work was challenging, but it felt meaningful in a way her previous assignments hadn't. Major Hawthorne had been transferred to a desk job pending his court-martial, but his replacement, Major Sarah Kim, made it clear that the squadron's culture was changing. She held an all-hands meeting her first week in command. "I want to be very clear about something," Kim announced. "Safety is our highest priority, not our second or third priority. If any of you identify a safety concern, I want to hear about it immediately. Anyone who reports a legitimate safety issue will have my full support, regardless of the impact. On mission timelines." After the meeting, Kim approached Becca personally. "Senior Airman Martinez, I've read your file and the IG report. I want you to know that the kind of moral courage you demonstrated is exactly what this squadron needs. I hope you'll consider making the Air Force a career." Becca had been thinking about that very question. The past few months had changed her perspective on military service entirely. What had started as a job had become something deeper, a calling to protect the people who served alongside her. "Ma'am, I'd like that very much," she replied. "I think I've found where I belong." The squadron's safety record improved dramatically over the following months. With the new leadership and cultural changes, airmen felt empowered to report issues, without fear of retaliation. The number of maintenance-related incidents dropped to 0 and crew confidence in the aircraft reached an all-time high. But for Becca, the most satisfying change was in how her colleagues treated her. She was no longer Mouse, she was Senior Airman Martinez, the person they came to when they had questions about regulations or needed advice on complex maintenance issues. The quiet, overlooked mechanic had become someone others looked up to and respected. Yet despite her new status, Becca remained fundamentally unchanged. She still kept her head down and focused on her work. She still spoke softly and chose her words carefully. She still preferred fixing problems to talking about them. The difference was that now, when she spoke, people listened. 2 years later, Staff Sergeant Rebecca Martinez stood in the same hangar where her ordeal had begun, watching a group of newly assigned airmen receive their first briefing on aircraft maintenance procedures. She'd been selected to lead the squadron's professional development program, training junior enlisted personnel on both technical skills and Air Force core values. The C-5M that had started everything, tail number 87-036, sat in the maintenance bay nearby, undergoing its scheduled inspection. The landing gear that had nearly caused a catastrophe had been completely replaced, and the aircraft was now one of the most reliable in the fleet. Sometimes Becca would pause during her daily rounds and look at it, remembering how terrified she'd been to speak up about those stress fractures. "Sergeant Martinez?" A young voice interrupted her thoughts. Airman First Class Jennifer Walsh, fresh out of tech school, approached with a maintenance manual in her hands. "I have a question about this hydraulic system check. The procedures seem to indicate one thing, but Senior Airman Johnson says we usually do it differently to save time." Becca smiled, remembering her own confusion as a new airman, trying to navigate the gap between regulations and real-world practices. "What do the technical orders say, Walsh?" "They say to perform a complete system pressure test and visual inspection of all fittings and connections." "And what does Senior Airman Johnson suggest?" "Just a quick pressure check and visual scan of the obvious problem areas. He says the full inspection takes too long and usually doesn't find anything anyway. Becca studied the young airman's face, seeing her own uncertainty from years ago reflected there. Walsh, let me ask you something. If you were flying on this aircraft with your family, which inspection would you want performed on the systems? That keep it in the air? Walsh considered the question seriously. The complete one, Sergeant. Then that's your answer. The technical orders aren't suggestions. They're the minimum standards required to ensure flight safety. Sometimes following them takes longer, sometimes it's inconvenient, but they're written in blood. Every procedure exists because someone somewhere paid a price for not following it. But what if Senior Airman Johnson gets angry? What if the other mechanics think I'm being too picky? Becca put a hand on the young woman's shoulder. Walsh, I'm going to tell you something that took me too long to learn. Your job isn't to make other people happy. Your job is to make sure this aircraft is safe for the people who trust their lives to it. If doing your job correctly makes someone angry, that says more about them than it does about you. What if they try to make things difficult for me? Then you document everything, follow the chain of command, and remember that you took an oath to do what's right, not what's easy. Becca's voice carried the weight of hard-earned experience. And Walsh, you won't be alone. There are more people who want to do the right thing than you might think. Sometimes they just need someone to show them it's possible. After Walsh left to perform her inspection, Becca walked over to the squadron's Wall of Excellence, where photos of outstanding airmen were displayed. Her own photo was there, taken the day she'd been promoted to staff sergeant, but it wasn't the only one that told a story of moral courage. Airman Torres had been promoted twice and was now training to become a quality assurance inspector himself. Senior Airman Peterson had returned to Travis and was serving as the squadron's safety NCO. Even some of the airmen who had initially been skeptical of Becca's actions had stepped up to report safety issues in their own areas of responsibility. The culture change hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been without setbacks. There were still supervisors who prioritized mission timelines over safety margins, still airmen who preferred to stay quiet rather than rock the boat. But the foundation had shifted. The squadron now had a reputation across the base for exceptional safety standards and professional integrity. Major Kim, who had been promoted to lieutenant colonel and reassigned to headquarters, had written in Becca's last performance evaluation, SS Scott Martinez has transformed not just her own career but the culture of an entire squadron. Her moral, courage under pressure, and unwavering commitment to doing what's right have inspired a generation of young airmen to uphold the highest standards of professional excellence. As Becca finished her evening rounds and prepared to head home, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that first confrontation with Major Hawthorne. She'd received several awards for her actions, been selected for advanced leadership, training, and was being considered for promotion to technical sergeant ahead of schedule. But the recognition, while gratifying, wasn't what mattered most to her. What mattered was the knowledge that aircrew were flying safer aircraft, that junior airmen felt empowered to speak up about safety concerns, and that the Air Force's core values weren't just words on a poster, but living principles that guided daily decisions. She still thought about Major Hawthorne sometimes. He'd been court-martialed and discharged from the Air Force, his 20-year career ending in disgrace. She took no pleasure in his downfall. If anything, she felt sorry for him. He'd been a skilled maintainer once, but somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of why their work mattered. As she walked to her car in the gathering dusk, Becca's phone buzzed with a text message from Walsh. Sergeant found a hydraulic leak during the full inspection. Probably would have missed it if I'd done the quick check. Thanks for the advice. Becca smiled and typed back, "Good catch, Walsh. That's what we're here for." Driving home through the California evening, she thought about the oath she'd taken as a young airman to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. She'd always understood the part about foreign enemies, but it had taken her longer to grasp that sometimes the domestic enemies weren't invading armies, but complacency, corruption, and the willingness to compromise principles for convenience. She was still the same person she'd always been, quiet, methodical, more comfortable with technical manuals than small talk, but she'd learned that being quiet didn't mean being weak, that being humble didn't mean being silent when silence could cost lives. The young mechanics in her squadron would never call her Mouse. To them, she was Sergeant Martinez, the NCO who taught them that following regulations wasn't just about avoiding punishment, but about honoring the trust placed in them by their fellow airmen. And if someday they faced their own Major Hawthorne, their own moment when doing the right thing required standing alone against authority, maybe they'd remember the quiet staff sergeant who showed them that one person with courage and conviction could change everything. That would be legacy enough. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.